Hello and welcome. I am Jay Combs, the VP of Marketing at ModelOp, and welcome to the Good Decisions, a monthly webinar for enterprise AI governance insights. I'm glad so many people have registered for this webinar and have showed up today. I know it can be a lot in the middle of the day, especially in the middle of the work week. There's just so much going on. But with AI tech, the use cases and regulations really evolving very, very rapidly. It's, at least from our perspective here at ModelOp, where we've had the chance to talk with many Fortune 500 companies, a lot of executives over the past 5 years. We've seen that there's really a huge gap in the education and ability to exchange insights and learnings around enterprise AI and enterprise AI governance, around the visibility and controls and reporting, showing the value of those AI initiatives. And so we wanted to create a forum where we could do those things, ask questions and share ideas, hence this webinar. So thank you all for joining. With that, this is our inaugural episode. So let's cue the Star Wars music for episode 1, Real World Lessons on AI Governance Urgency and the Risks of Enterprise AI Gone Wrong. This is going to be led by Dave Trier, our VP of Product, who's been in this space for a very, very long time. And I'm going to turn it over to him. Dave, take it away.
Thank you so much. Just mic check, Jay. Sound good?
You sound great.
Excellent. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I saw a couple from over in Europe and even farther east. So welcome to this. My name is Dave Trier, VP of Product for ModelOp. And as Jay mentioned, I've had the privilege of speaking with hundreds of executives, practitioners, and users of AI and ML systems over the past decade plus. And in particular, over the last couple of years, we've had lots of conversations around AI and ML. And it comes down to a couple of key questions, especially for those just getting started on their AI journey. What are the risks that I should be thinking about when adopting AI in our organization? And what are some of the key steps that I should be thinking about to get started? Where should I go about starting this AI governance journey to make sure I'm safeguarding the organization overall? So in today's conversation, this webinar, that we'll do just that. We're first going to highlight a couple of examples of where AI has gone wrong. And really that helps for you guys to think about what are the risks that I need to be safeguarding the organization around the usage of AI. We're going to talk about a couple of examples from very large organizations in terms of what did they do just to get started, specifically around visibility, around the controls to be put into place, and around automation, especially for those AI systems that are being used in production. And then we're going to summarize all of that into how do I get started? What are a couple of key steps for me to get going in my overall journey in the usage of AI? As Jay mentioned before, there's the Q&A section of this webinar tool. Please ask questions. We'll do our best to address as many of them as we can, but ultimately we can follow up as we go. Second, we'll also have a couple of poll questions. As Jay mentioned, we want this to be interactive, so please give us your feedback so that we can continue this dialogue, not only in this webinar, but even after the fact as well. So with that, let's talk about it. Everybody's heard of AI, right? Or otherwise you wouldn't be on this call. But specifically, what has been really interesting about generative AI, I've been doing technology for over 20 years in the large enterprise. I've never seen a technology move at this fast of a pace to be adopted by these large organizations. That AI, generative AI, is being talked about, even used in production for not only just technology teams and analytics teams, but by marketing and finance and operations. Again, just unprecedented usage of a new technology. And as you can see, it's not just the practitioners and the users, but generative AI has elevated the conversation to the C-level, to the board of directors, and even to externally. This particular stat shows how AI has been cited in a number of earnings calls. You see that big jump over the last year of how AI has been, again, mentioned in these earning calls. So it's not just about the general users, but it's everybody across the organization that is essentially using or demanding the use of generative AI. So what does that mean? It means that all these teams want to move quickly to adopt and use this potentially transformative AI capability. That's great. Got a great demand for AI, but what are the risks that I need to be thinking about? As with any new technology, there are risks. Generative AI and AI as a whole has significant risks. So let's talk about those. Let's talk about a few of the ones that we've seen more publicly, if you will, across the landscape. A lot of times with AI, people think about, oh, it's ethical concerns. I need to make sure that it's not racially or ethical bias in any way, shape, or form. absolutely paramount. So that is something that I think is well talked about across the organization, across the entire market as well. But let's talk about a couple of the other risks that you need to be thinking about in addition to that ethical concern. First is really around financial risk. This is an example from Twitter, pardon me, X, where there was an actor that unknowingly or knowingly tricked a Chevy dealership that had adopted the use of ChatGPT to give away a Chevy Tahoe for $1. Right. And so obviously this was an actor that knew it was using ChatGPT and really took steps to again, trick this GPT, this chatbot, into giving away a Chevy for $1. Now, we all know that this example would never hold up in a court of law. But what it does raise into awareness here is that there are financial risks should AI go wrong. If there aren't the appropriate AI safeguards in place, that they can have actual top line or bottom line impacts around the financials for an organization. So again, the takeaway is please think about what are the financial risks and concerns should AI go wrong. The second example is actually touching upon Rite Aid in this case. This was one where Rite Aid had adopted an AI-based facial recognition technology. And they did it in a way was probably a little bit too fast, because what happened is that as this facial recognition technology was being used, it actually was producing biased results. It was looking for potential shoplifters or other nefarious actors within the various stores, and it was producing those biased results. It got so bad that the FTC stepped in. They stepped in and said, Rite Aid, you can no longer use this technology, nor can you use any AI technology for the next couple of years. And furthermore, that this is an example of, well, you know what, there wasn't actual law. There was no law that demanded the use of, a particular way, shape, or form around regulatory, but it's one where the actual regulatory agency did step in. And I like to come back to a quote from John Davidson, who's a civil liberty and digital rights activist, who said, algorithmic lawlessness is no longer an option. Again, if you don't have the appropriate safeguards in place, that you are going to potentially expose yourself to regulatory action. So this is one where you need to have that, again, the appropriate AI governance capability. But let me go on to the third example. So we first started with the financial risks. We started about the regulatory risks, and obviously the ethical risks around the use of AI. The last one is actually around IP risk. This was an example from Samsung. This was actually very early on, believe it or not, where, again, not a bad actor, just an employee within Samsung unknowingly submitted source code out to GPT, which, as many know, that can be then incorporated into the training of the GPT foundational model, and could potentially expose that intellectual property out to users. Again, it was not a bad actor. It was no nefarious or unknowing. It was done unknowingly. But the point being is that there are real concerns about IP leakage out to the broader community if the appropriate safeguards aren't in place. So again, we talked about financial, we talked about regulatory, we talked about IP risks and potentials around the use of AI as a whole. Let's go ahead and talk about some of those lessons and all those conversations. How do these large organizations start to take some measures to safeguard the organization? I'm going to start with this first example. And as you can see from the headline, almost every one of our customers, as well as the large organizations out there, get started with just having visibility into what AI initiatives are actually being used across the organization. As we like to say, you can't govern what you don't see. So in this situation, it was actually a large healthcare organization where they had hundreds of AI and also ML use cases, where those were spread across 10 different organizations. Each one of those had tens of teams. What was interesting about this, though, is that because of in the wake of generative AI, is that in the past, all of those were mainly internally developed type AI and ML use cases. Here, there were a combination of internally developed models. There were vendor models, meaning that they were AI systems or models that were purchased by a third party. But they also had an embedded AI. So they had software packages that they purchased that had AI embedded in those. And what the challenge with this, as I said at the beginning of this, is that there were teams that didn't traditionally use this around operations and marketing and finance, teams that you wouldn't normally think about. They've started to use AI and just didn't know about it, right? So there's unknown risks around the usage of AI because they didn't have visibility into it. Not only that, if they did have a regulatory authority ask them about it to report on where using AI throughout your organization, that was not an easy task overall. And this is more important, especially in healthcare organizations where there's a lot of, within the United States at least, state level authorities that are asking for different healthcare providers, where is AI being used? Tell me all the systems that are being used. So again, this was a challenge that was becoming more and more urgent for this particular example. So what's the right way to get started in this case? Well, it's around visibility. You can't govern what you don't see. And in this way, you can think about, we're showing an example of how you can pull together a comprehensive view of all the different AI initiatives out there, whether it's internally developed, whether you're using a cloud-based capability, whether you're purchasing it from a vendor like a ChatGPT from OpenAI, or whether it's embedded AI within a system itself. You are able to have a systematic and comprehensive view of all those AI initiatives so that you can report out to your executives. Here's all the AI initiatives. What's the risk tiering around them? Where are they in their life cycle? Are they being used for business decisioning? Are they early on in the development? But regardless, you have that enterprise level visibility into the overall organizational usage. So I'm going to pause there. And Jay, looks like we've got a question coming out. You want to bring that one up?
We've got one we got one in the chat from Mark Clifford. It says, what about permission risk? Because an individual or team doesn't know the lineage of the data, they don't know what contents they have, and they do not have permission to use. Can you talk about maybe how permission risk fits into here?
Yeah, that's a good question. So is a common one that comes up overall, where, first and foremost, it's about cataloging what those AI systems are. And then as part of that cataloging and this inventory to give you a visibility, it goes through proper processes to understand, okay, is this actually approved to be used? Who is it approved? Oftentimes you actually capture what's the usage, what's the allowed usage, what's the scope, the usage, the limitations as well. And in that, generally the limitations or the scope will dictate, okay, well, these sets of, it is allowed for use for this particular usage pattern or for this particular set of individuals. So in that way, this is that inventory with that approval process that helps to dictate some of the next permission, or the permissions around it. So that's a great question.
Maybe kind of building on that, I got one more in the Q&A bot. How come if OpenAI and AWS are implementing governance for their own LLMs or models, why would an enterprise that uses that technology also need to implement their own governance? Isn't that redundant? Why do it?
Yeah, that's another common question. Overall, absolutely that, especially the regulatory authorities, U.S. Federal government, as well as EU and others, are putting a lot of pressure on companies that develop foundational models. Think your LLMs, the OpenAIs of the world, AWS is putting a lot of pressure on them to have some appropriate governance in place. So that's going to continue. But the reality is, if you actually look at some of the regulations around this, is that even if you're using a foundation model where OpenAI and AWS has taken a ton of safeguards, if you take that into your organization, you are still accountable for the usage of that LLM, because you may use it for different aspects. You may use it for, a customer service bot. You may use it for internal HR policy, in which case the usage may vary. So you are still accountable for the actual results that are occurring in the overall usage of that foundational model. And that's actually been, very clear in much of the regulations, whether it's the U.S. executive order, whether that's in the World Health Organization recently published a guideline around the usage of LLMs. All of them state that you as an organization are accountable for how you use those foundation models overall. So let me keep going on to the second lesson. So first we talked about visibility. That's the first step that we see when getting started with a large organization. Easy step. And as I mentioned before, there are comprehensive capabilities like ModelOps software that allows for inventorying and have that visibility across the organization. The next lesson is really turning towards, this is a different industry. This was in a more consumer packaged good industry where they had hundreds of AI and ML use cases, again, across the globe, a number of different teams. What was interesting about them was that these models were actually making decisions automatically, that they were being used for doing purchasing around different spend across the marketing and finance and operations organizations. And so what this did was it introduced, like we talked about on that last one, that case study is around this real financial risk should AI go wrong. That overall, if something were start to recommend bad results or bad recommendations or bad inferences, that it had a material impact on their bottom line. And what some of the challenges that they faced is when they tried to do this on their own was that there was just not a comprehensive, and it was inconsistent at best around how they would do independent reviews, comprehensive testing before usage, and just an overarching consistent way to enforce governance processes across the organization. But they also had this challenge was they knew they needed a more consistent governance process, but they also didn't want to slow down innovation, right? That there's the opportunity of using AI ML, and they don't want to slow that down. They want to capture that innovation quickly. So you have this constant friction between getting out there quickly with innovation and also having the appropriate safeguards in place. So with this one, again, a very simple step that they took was really introducing a consistent but lightweight set of controls that really helped to harness the Wild West of AI. That they use, they had their governance process that they had really defined on paper, but that was been done manually in the past and it was inconsistent and ad hoc. But they turned that into actual automated controls, automated processes to make sure every step in the governance process had actually been followed, regardless of, again, if it was an open source model, whether it's a vendor model, whether it's embedded AI. They wanted to have that consistent way to enforce all the governance steps in there, but then ultimately ensure that as part of it, those governance steps, there's the appropriate testing that's been done. There's appropriate independent reviews for especially high-risk models. All the things that would have really helped in the case of Rite Aid, if you will, to ensure that there's that comprehensive verification and review before it actually made it out into the wild. So again, the key takeaway here is first, make sure you're establishing that visibility, which can be done very quickly with the right inventory. The second takeaway, as we're showing here, is around having the right set of process controls to ensure that the governance steps are actually being followed with the appropriate reviews and approvals and evidence all along the way.
Hey, Dave, I got another question, the Q&A bot here. So kind of related to this, what is driving the scaling of governance up from like one team or manual processes? What is actually driving companies to get started?
Yeah, that's another great question. What's really driving, there's actually two facets or two potential starters that's driving them to get started overall. One is just volume. I think I talked about this before, that a lot of our customers and prospects went from having a couple of AI use cases to having tens or hundreds of AI use cases pretty much overnight because of generative AI. So it's the sheer volume. When you have one or two generative or AI use cases, you can likely handle this with spreadsheets and emails and committees and things like that. But now you jump to hundreds of them. It's really, really important to have a scalable way to safeguard the organization. And that's when they turn to having a more systematic and comprehensive AI governance program. So again, it's the combination of volume. The other one that I would say, the second one I should mention on that is actually the variety or complexity. As I mentioned on that first lesson that we talked about, that it wasn't just internally developed models at that point. They had a whole slew of vendor models that they purchased, and then software systems that had embedded AI. So you have this variety of different types that are coming in addition to the volume, where again, a spreadsheet is it just doesn't suffice anymore. All right, so I'm going to move on to our final lesson. So we talked about visibility, just getting your handle around all the different AI use cases, where they're being used, what teams they're using, which ones are higher risk, lower risk. We talked about then, okay, as they move throughout their usage, development, testing, et cetera, how we get the right set of controls with the evidence that we need. Now let's talk about we're in production. And let's face it, AI will go wrong. And the important thing here is, what are you doing to safeguard the organization, to proactively mitigate any potential risk? Because AI will go wrong. That whether it's generative AI, especially LLMs, they would have the high potential to hallucinate. So I'm turning to a actual financial example here where it didn't hallucinate and go wrong and cause all kinds of problems, but it's an example where they got ahead of it. They had over 50 different AI and ML use cases, again, across a number of lines of businesses, lots of vendor model usage. So it wasn't just the internally developed ones, but they were very, very cautious to protect their brand, right? Their reputation was paramount to them. So they wanted to make sure that they got ahead of any potential AI going wrong. But they also had this challenge, was that the traditional metrics didn't fit for generative AI, right? Especially LLMs, the traditional ways that you might monitor a data science model of regression, what have you, just wouldn't work. And then they also had this challenge where that if something did go wrong, they had to take action immediately. So in this case, this is where they implemented, and we helped them obviously with introducing regular monitoring, making sure there's oversight of what's happening in production. And specifically around generative AI, again, software platforms like ModelOp Center offer a series of metrics specifically for generative AI, looking at things such as sentiment analysis, especially around chatbots, looking for PII leakage, looking for performance using techniques like cross-LLM validation. So introducing these constant monitoring against the various thresholds that are within their risk tolerance and appetite. But then if something goes wrong, having that automation behind the scenes to flip into that fallback plan. So that, again, if AI were to go wrong, they always have a proactive way to go back to the original use case. Again, this, in the case of that original one with the dollar Chevy, if you will, could have been quite useful if somebody noticed, or if it was noticed that something nefarious was happened, you have a fallback, so to just shut down that chatbot, if you will. So with that, I went through this pretty quickly overall, where we talked about a couple of key lessons learned. We first talked about the risks that are raised as a result of AI, the financial, the brand, the regulatory, as well as IP leakage. And then we talked about three different ways, or three different steps, if you will, to safeguard the organization. First, getting visibility into AI initiatives. Second, to implement a lightweight set of controls so that you can have your appropriate testing and evidence throughout before you even use it. And third, once it is being used in production, to have the appropriate monitoring and automated fallback should AI go wrong. So hopefully you got a sense of, here are the things I need to be thinking about. Here are a couple actions that I can take. And also that there are capabilities like ModelOp software to help you easily get started along your AI governance journey. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jay in the interest of time to wrap up and hopefully answer any final questions. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah, the time went really fast, Dave. Thank you. There is one great question, I think, from Brian. I think it's a good kind of closing point to make here. Related to the poll question, is there a recommended ownership approach for AI governance to avoid these pitfalls that we're seeing here out in the wild in the headlines?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first off, is having a designated AI governance person that is accountable for AI governance. So that's first. And then from there, a lot of these lessons that I talked about and executives that I've talked with, they actually have a cross team committee, if you will. It's chaired by the AI governance lead, but a cross committee representation from, again, technology and the different lines of businesses that are part of this overall to ensure that, again, AI is pervasive now, right? To ensure you have coverage across all the different organizations. But definitely having one person that is in charge specifically of AI governance is the key recommendation. Great question.
All right. I know we're basically got 1 minute left. This went really fast. So let's just kind of close out our first episode here. So are you and your enterprise ready? I guess one point to make here, as Dave talked through this, governance can feel like a big and daunting word, but it really doesn't need to be. And we talked about the recommended maybe ownership approach, but the approach to getting started is to start with, take targeted steps to protect your enterprise from these undue risks, so you don't end up in the headlines. But it can be something that you can start today and isn't a multi-year approach. It can actually be done in a matter of weeks to get you started and scale up from there. So that's really, really important to know. And obviously, we'd love to talk to you more about that topic. You can reach out to us at modelop.com or sales@modelop.com, where we can discuss some of your needs, answer some of the questions that maybe weren't answered here today, and understand the challenges that you're going through. We do offer executive workshops for your teams to help you kind of unpack where to get started and how to bring your organization on board. So that's something we'd love to connect with you on if that's something you're interested in. And with that, let's go to the final slide, Dave, here. All right, so this was episode 1. We're going to be doing it again next month. And next month, we're going to be focused on regulations in healthcare, pharma, and biotech, and possibly some other industries. We know the regulatory environment is, fairly, it's evolving very quickly. There isn't a federal level regulatory regulations around AI yet. It's kind of a patchwork of investigations and state level and local level elements, and it's really hard to kind of navigate right now. So we're going to unpack that and share what we know, and Dave's an expert in the various regulations and other investigations that are happening around AI, and he's going to share that next month. So you can start registering for that today. We are going to send around this deck. We did record the webinar. We're going to post it, so you can share it, and please tell your friends and peers about this. If you think they get value from it, we'd love to bring more folks into this forum and hear from them. So thank you all so much for taking the time today to attend. Appreciate you staying just a couple minutes over. And we hope to see you next month. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any more questions. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all.